Hi, Stephanie. Welcome back. I'm going
Hi,
to say welcome back. Always tech issues, always.
I love it. It's really nice though. It's good to have a little practice, right?
Yeah, no, it's really lovely. So I am super excited to have you here because I have been reading your book. I'm enthralled by your book, which is The Day My Vagina Broke. You have written this extraordinary book. You are known as the Brave Mama for a good reason. You have a website called The Brave Mama, and you've just launched a new podcast, which I'm super excited to talk about as well. But I thought it was really worth talking, first of all, about your extraordinary book, your truth, your honesty, and something that was written out of your lived experience of having and surviving an extraordinary birth trauma. Something that for a long time, I guess, has been kind of a bizarrely taboo subject. So I wanted to talk to you about your bravery in getting it out there because we're all led to believe it's all easy and lovely and every woman just has a baby and it's so easy.
Yeah, isn't it funny that it's only when you've probably lived in the birth trauma space you hear it a lot in that realm. And so now I get to see both sides of the coin in terms of natural birth advocacy and how beautiful it can be for some women. And I think that's amazing. I just probably wish I would have known the other half of what could happen. And at the same time, I understand that we don't want to scare women, okay? Because it's already a really fearful thing for some, But I feel like we're also duping them of half of the information because and you very kindly said it's an extraordinary experience, but it's also very common now. And it's
Yeah.
becoming more common because we are birthing much older. We are having bigger babies, and I know people will jump straight onto that and say, if you believe and you trust your body and you can breathe your baby down no matter what, because that's the belief that a lot of people do hold really close. Birthing is
And
really emotional, right?
absolutely. And I think, I'm so happy for women who have had a natural birth and it's been a beautiful experience or a difficult, experience, but not traumatizing. I'm happy for women who have lived that experience. For myself personally, having survived quite an extraordinary birth trauma myself, I think it's something that, and I was a very young mum, and I did say this to you off air before. I wish in a way that I had been brave enough to write my story and share that with other women. But at the time, being such a young mum, I was 21, nearly 22.
Oh,
And I didn't think that I had the right really to be talking to all these older mothers,
sure.
about my experience, which is just crazy now when I look back. So I think that you writing this book is brave, brilliant, but also extraordinarily helpful to other women on the lead up to having a baby, but also to know what could happen, but also for those that have lived this to give them a sense that they are not alone. So tell us how the book came about, because I know we did talk about this off air just before, but it's such a fantastic story. So tell us about the lead up to going off to write a book.
Sure. Just before I do though, I just want to say it's never too late, Sandy. I know that your birth was when you were 21, but I can tell you, and I will share with you as I go through my journey, that it's so cathartic for you. So obviously, authors write for an audience, but it's also okay just to write for you as a part of what you need to do. So it's never too late. Uh,
I have written about it, Stephanie. I think all my years of writing, but definitely didn't share it. But I think it's part of a much bigger story. But
yes.
yeah, love what you've done. So let's talk about the lead up to this
Yes.
because I love this story. This is so fantastic.
I think for our followers, they might have heard it a few times, but basically, in a nutshell, it came to be that I had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. My husband used to work away a week out of every month. And this one particular morning, I was stuck on the toilet because my birth injuries make it really hard to go to the toilet. So it's a bit of a drawn out process. Anyway, I came out to the kitchen to find the entire kitchen floor covered in a box of cornflakes and an entire jar of honey, and my 2 toddlers laughing their head off. I couldn't laugh. All I could do was cry. I just cried because I couldn't do it. I couldn't clean it up physically. I was like, how the heck am I going to do this? And emotionally, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I think that was probably the point where I thought, well, actually, I didn't clean it up for a while. It stayed there. I sat there and I cried, and then I laughed, and then I cried, and then I laughed, and then I just reached for my phone to just bury my head in something else. I just wanted to ignore it. So the kids were happy just swimming in it. I was like, yep, bugger it. I took some photos. I took photos because that's what you do as parents. You take photos of when your kids do really crazy stuff like that to show their 21st. But and simultaneously at the same time, we were going through a lawsuit against the hospital where this birth trauma happened. And my legal team had said to me, stay off social media. No social media. We never want any issue coming at you. I'm like, okay, sure.
And that's tough as a young mum with toddlers in the house. And, you know, that's kind of your connection in a way sometimes to the world.
Yes. So I used to play Tetris a lot. I don't, just to keep the mind active. I think parenting is very physical and emotional, but I also love to be mentally stimulated. So I used to play Tetris. But I also, well, I was still allowed to go on LinkedIn because LinkedIn was linked to my professional career in education. So I was just doing a bit of a scroll, and then I saw this post from Andrew Griffiths, and he is an author, award-winning author, but he just happened to be in Bali, and he did this panning shot of the beach, and he said, I'm doing an author's retreat this week, come along. And I felt like he was talking to me.
Yeah,
like
wow.
Just me.
So like almost like a spiritual pull.
Which sounds hocus pocus, I get it. But all of a sudden I thought, well, you know what, I've been to Bali, I don't love it, I don't want to be an author, but my God, I need to be there. I have to be there. How am I going to get there? Then I spoke to my husband when he returned home that weekend, and I said, I have to go to Bali. He was like, what? Why? When? What? I said, I need to go on Thursday. He goes like, this Thursday coming? I'm like, yep. He's like, okay, how are you going to do that? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm just going to do it. So I did. I just got childcare and, you know, how do you pay for it? Oh my God, let's work that out later. Whatever. And I was on a plane and
charge it.
I arrived in Bali on the day it started, and I rocked up and walked in, and Andrew's like, I am so glad to see you. And I said, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, but I'm just here.
Wow. And no doubt, as a young mum, 2 toddlers, probably you arrived stressed, tired, exhausted.
So guilty.
Right?
So
yes.
guilty.
And all that mother guilt.
Oh, like Sandy, I was like, how did I just leave my toddlers at home? Like, it was so hard. I thought, what mum does that? What mum uses money that you don't actually have in your young family? But I still had to be there, and it was for a reason, which I found out later on, obviously, because later that day, after day one, you had to go home and then write. And I'm like, oh, I had to pretend I'm an author, now I have to be one. Shit. So then I just started just journaling, because it was always just going to be, you know, dear diary, this happened, it was horrible, lock it away, I'm okay, and I could move on. But the entire night, I just wrote and I just cried the entire time. Like, I was like, oh man, the grief and loss of having that motherhood journey to motherhood experience, and just feeling ripped off, feeling really, because at the same time, we never really told anyone. I was embarrassed. Yeah. I thought I failed. I call it vaginal childbirth because I know people love natural birth and Caesar, and they love to pit each other, and it's really political. But for me, it's vaginal birth or cesarean birth. You become a mum, or even adoption, right? You're still becoming a mum. Whatever that transition is, who cares? But that's why I say I feel like the vaginal birth experience I had it blindsided me, Sandy. It blindsided someone who was educated, who went to all the birthing classes, who felt like she was a really good patient. I was really well behaved. And you feel like, and this is what you get. You're just like, oh, I failed. So I didn't tell anyone. And I particularly didn't tell anyone about the injuries that it left me with. So yes, it's one thing to have a traumatic experience. And I think it's another thing to be left with physical injuries that never leave you alone. Every single day, on repeat, I live with those injuries.
Yeah, wow. And that's why I think you writing this book is going to be so helpful to so many women, not just on the lead up to pregnancy. And as you said before, not that we want to frighten women, we don't.
No.
But this is really, your book really is about educating people that stuff can happen, and actually stuff does happen all the time. It's just not talked about very much. And we do live in a society where I find myself when I meet pregnant women or younger women going through it and they ask me about, oh, what was it like when you were pregnant? First of all, I loved being pregnant. Absolutely loved
Me
it.
too.
Loved every day of it. I'm one of those women people love to hate. Never had morning sickness, all of that stuff. But I shy away from talking about the birth experience of my first child. And I do so very deliberately because I'm so concerned about terrifying these women who are pregnant, regardless of their age, who because I said younger women, but it's not always younger women. But I do tend to shy away from it because, as I said, I'm very worried that they're going to walk in and go, oh my God, what if that happens to me? But in actual fact, what you're bravely doing is showing that, yes, stuff can happen, and the more prepared we are, the better we may be able to deal with it. So let's talk about your extraordinary journey on the lead up to motherhood.
Sure.
And then the pregnancy, and then leading into the birth, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah. It's always nice to know, I think the journey beforehand gives you context. And so in my early 20s, I went to my GP because I was 26 and I said, I want to have 6 kids. I want to start today. What do I do? Blah, 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 blah. And so she's prescribed, kind of give me all the vitamins and everything like that. I'm like, right, I'm going to go do that. And just at the very end of that appointment, I said, oh, and by the way, I've just got this little niggling thing in my neck. It feels like a pea. I feel it when I've got my handbag on there. Just have a little look. And obviously the partner I was with at the time was an AMBO. And he's like, oh, man, you're such a hypochondriac. It's nothing.
Oh, God.
And so instead of going in and wanting to get pregnant, I walked out pretty much within a couple of days with a cancer diagnosis.
Wow.
So Hodgkin's lymphoma is what that little pea-sized lump was. And went through that journey of chemotherapy, surgery, radiation for the next year and a bit. All I could think about that entire time was like, but when can I get pregnant? When can I have a baby? And I did all my research, and a lot of it was all about letting all the toxins exit your body for about a year afterwards. I was like, I don't want to wait that long. I was really impatient. I was like, I knew what I wanted and I wanted it now. So, in life it really puts you on a path where you may not be able to steer the ship. You just have to go with the flow. And eventually, I think cancer exhausted that love. It was, and you hear that. It's pretty common to survive a relationship, to survive a young cancer is usually not that good odds. And so it was obviously meant to be for a reason, because then I met my big love. And and we also wanted to have a baby and get married, and we did all of that, ducks in a row type thing. But then it just wasn't happening. I think it took about 5 years. And early on there was talks with some IVF clinics, and I did some procedures that kind of, in layman's terms, it flushed the system out. Went on all these multivitamins, and I was meant to go back on the Wednesday to start the IVF drugs. But on the Monday, I rang and said, hey, I'm pregnant. And the receptionist was so excited. She's like, this happens all the time. It's amazing. Yeah, congratulations. That's great. But then from then on in, and this is only something I have revealed more recently because I didn't even know it was a thing. The entire pregnancy, I loved being pregnant. I felt it. I was like, this is phenomenal. But I was really shit scared. I was scared of miscarriage the entire time. Every time I went to the toilet and I pulled my knickers down, I thought I would see blood.
Yeah.
Even if there wasn't, I was picturing it. And I think that stemmed from, well, number one, obviously trying for so long and the yearning to be a mum. And number two, when I went in to have my first blood test at my GP, the very first one after you've peed on the stick, the receptionist rang me at work and said, "Oh, you need to come in for an appointment urgently." And I was like, "What does that mean?" And she wouldn't tell me. She said, "Oh, sorry, the doctor has to see you." I'm like, "I'm an hour away. I'm about to get in my car and rock up. You have to tell me." Anyway, so she wouldn't tell me. And I rang back and I said to my GP, "You have to tell me." Like I got him on the phone because I was in a panic. I was thinking, "Oh, miscarriage. Yeah, I'm having a miscarriage. That's it. We're done." And he said, "Oh, no, you've got gestational diabetes. You're fine. It's all good. I'll talk to you when you get here tomorrow." I'm like, "Okay." So it was just that they picked up that I had gestational diabetes really early.
Right.
So it wasn't a miscarriage. But from then on in, I did worry about it the entire time. And very sadly, a girl who I worked with, who's a very, very dear friend of mine, we were pregnant at the same time, and she did miscarry. And so it was just that constant around you. Like it was just this far away. And I don't know why I have not shared that before, but I think I lived in fear my entire pregnancy.
Yeah, and I think that that's quite common. I know I had 3 miscarriages. I have 3 children. I'm very grateful for that. But there was a huge gap between my first child, which was the trauma birth, and the second child. And when I did get pregnant with my daughter, I know that I walked around in that pregnancy and I was very consciously aware of it, that I was terrified the whole time. I did hemorrhage actually at 28 weeks with her. And that was so terrifying, and being at the hospital and them jabbing me with, steroids and all sorts of things. And she made it, and thank goodness. And then from there, bizarrely, we went on and had yet another child who was unexpected and brilliant, and we were so pleased. Yeah. Not that he was unexpected, we just never, I just didn't go back on contraception. So it was like, well, if it happens.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But I did walk around absolutely living with this very conscious fear. And so I do think that is very, very common. And a lot of women perhaps don't recognise it in themselves, or if they do, they don't talk about it.
I did not even recognise it until now, and she's 6. I think it was just this year a conversation I was having on the podcast, and I was like, actually, I used to do that all the time. Doesn't everyone do that? And she's like, no.
No.
So I do feel like that now, with that context, setting myself up for sharing what happened in the birth and feeling like I contributed to it. Perhaps my fear did. Just perhaps that fear of losing the baby was so prominent that I wasn't able to get my cervix to relax and contract, or I wasn't able to, I was forcing my headspace to breathe the baby down, but I probably was so tense everywhere else with this fear. And this is why I'm talking about it now with you, is that I want pregnant women to be able to work through fear during pregnancy. I never had that opportunity. So I would say things like, I'll give you an example. "Oh, well, what's a cesarean?" And I was in a natural birth advocate group, my midwifery lab practice, and the response to that would be, "Oh, you don't need to worry about cesarean. Forget it. That's not going to happen to you because you're going to let your vagina open like a lotus flower and that baby's going to come out because you're going to have the right playlist. You're going to have the right candles. You're going to have the dark room. You're not going to let your mum in." And they told me the script to have a vaginal birth the way that they wanted it to go for me, which is all love. Like, it's all coming from a good place. But when I was scared, I was dismissed. No one ever said, "Oh, hang on a minute, she's a bit scared here. We probably should refer her on to a psychologist. Let's let her talk to X, Y, and Z." Whatever that looks like. It was just like the door was slammed shut, and me trying to be a good patient, I was like, okay, I'll just pretend like nothing's wrong. Here I go.
And I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And right.
But I was dying on the inside going, holy shit. But what if she dies? And I was, that's all I could think of. And I think that I wish I addressed that more in the book. I don't think I didn't realize as I was writing it.
But I think that that's really an extraordinary thing as well, that in writing the book, which was really hugely cathartic for you and helpful for other women, that, as you say, there's still things post that writing of the book that you are coming to grips with and coming to terms with. And I think this is why what you're doing is so remarkable, that for some women there is definitely, PTSD, there's definitely trauma that lingers after childbirth for many years. And
Yeah.
that people keep reliving it, right? I didn't know that I was hanging on to the trauma of mine until 8 years later. I'm pregnant with my second child. And as I said, living in this absolutely fearful, horrendous space of all of it, not really knowing what was going to happen. It's a big thing. It's a lot for women to hang on to. So let's talk about, thankfully, your pregnancy was fantastic. It was okay. And so then you go into this beautiful birthing suite.
Yeah,
And
well, and I think too, because I had that gestational diabetes diagnosis really early on, I was able to manage it, and I felt like I had autonomy and control, that if I just did the right things and ate the right food and did the right exercise and took the right blood tests, I didn't have to have medication. So I was like, okay, I can do that. And I did. And I think even we had to express colostrum at 30 weeks, and I played the music and tried to do everything, and it wasn't quite working. But by the time we got to feeling any type of labor pains, the line was, if you feel like you're going into labor, make a cake. So stay home and bake a
wow.
cake. So I did. It was my uncle's birthday. I was like, okay, I'll make a cake. And I rang my husband. I said, babe, I'm making a cake. He's like, okay, cool, yeah. Oh, you're making a cake. I better get home. And so I knew something was happening. It was way past the initial due date. I think we were 5 days over what they predicted. And I know now that the due date, they just shouldn't say it in the first place, because it puts a number in someone's head. They stick to it. It's really hard to be, oh, well, if you're 5 days over, and then everyone has an opinion about due dates and early and late, and it's a confusing time. So I made a cake, and then by that late afternoon, I was like, oh, we need to go in the hospital. It's coming. And so the bag was in the car. I was in the car a week before. We drove in, and I saw the midwife initially, and they were going to check us into this room. And then she came and she checked me. She's like, you're going home. You're 1 centimeter. No good. Come back later. I was like, oh, but I'm here now. I wanted to stay, but it wasn't advised for whatever reason. And so I went home, and I labored, and I jumped on the yoga ball and did all the funny, sounds and showers and baths and things. And then I just got to the point, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So we rang my friend who was in Amber, and he dropped us in. And then my midwife looked at me. She's like, oh, you're going to meet your baby tonight. You're 7 centimeters dilated. It was 11:30 at night. So here I am thinking, I'm going to have a baby in half an hour. Awesome. Super excited. And they kind of checked us into the suite, and it was like a hotel, and it was really lovely. The lights were low, and it was still really romantic. I will say that. The initial part of the birth was exactly how it was sold and told to us, that it would be lovely. Our midwife, who we trusted and loved, would be there, but she was really quiet, letting us do our thing. Jumped in the bath, and I remember at one stage I nudged my husband. I'm like, is this it? This is pretty easy. What are women whinging about? The joke's on me, I say. The joke's on me. So I don't have accurate timelines here, as in what happened at what time, but basically it went from that lovely calm bath to the next day. So we're heading into lunchtime the next day. Feeder in stirrups. The room is full of medical staff and my midwife. And I remember the registrar, I think she came in, she said, basically, if you don't let me do this now, I'm going to have to send you for a Caesar. And then my first thoughts were, oh, I'm going to the naughty corner because I failed. Oh, no.
Wow. Isn't that awful what society has done to women?
Yes, and it's predominantly women doing it to other women.
Absolutely true.
So And to be fair, it's probably a whole lot of patriarchal stuff behind that. I'm just
Oh,
going
there
to,
absolutely is,
yeah.
believe me. But and internalized misogyny that goes on for
Yes,
female medical staff as well. Not all,
correct.
by the way. There are some phenomenal medical staff, and believe me, they saved me. So, yeah.
Yes,
But
so
you're right. There are some who are very hardcore. This is the way it's going to be.
yeah.
Mm,
And to be fair, like I just want to be fair in that conversation because it's not one thing that
of course.
I don't think led to this trauma. It was a collective of stuff. So then basically they said the baby's posterior, so she was facing the wrong way. We just need to do a slight cut, they called it. A slight cut. I was like, a cut of what?
That sounds okay. Sounds like I can deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was thinking, what are they cutting? I didn't even know what episiotomy was. And I felt, that's where
Mm,
I felt stupid because I was like, I don't remember that in the book. That wasn't in my meditation. No one said episiotomy. So anyway, they cut from front to back. And then they tried to use a vacuum to suck her out the day after the fourth failed attempt, which I now know. Legally, they were only allowed two, but they went in for the fourth. They tore the scalp off Elsie's head because
oh, good God.
it kept popping off. Mind you, in this entire experience, there was no pain medication because that was part of
Wow.
the natural birth advocacy plan is that you don't need drugs because you're a woman. You're
Oh
tough.
God. It's to me that's almost abuse. But anyway, keep going.
A lot of women do resonate with that a lot.
Mm,
So then they said, well, we're just going to put these forceps in and get her out. And of course, by that stage, we thought something was wrong because why do you go from calm to room full of people and all of a
and
sudden
frantic.
and
Yeah.
forceps like why that anyway, so I kept asking what's wrong, and they kept saying nothing. I'm like, freaking lying, they're lying to me. So then I lost trust because I thought if there was nothing wrong you wouldn't be here. So anyway, forceps went in, baby was out, and she was on my chest. We think amazing, finally. There was a moment there where I thought I was dying or I wanted to because the pain was
The
so
pain.
intense. Then when it was over, I was in shock from the relief of the pain ending to the point where we just looked at this baby and didn't do anything. I didn't cry, I didn't put my arms around her, I just was in shock, right?
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we just need to do some stitching, which ended up being like 2 layers of internal stitching and another 40 external stitches. Like it was massive repair work going on down there. But by that point, I didn't care. Baby was here, and I was like, I can't believe she's here. She's alive. Oh my God. And she was over 10 pounds she was over 4 kilos.
Whoa.
So they said
Ouch.
that's big. And I'm like, I don't know what a big baby is. I
That's a
didn't.
big baby. Yeah.
So I do, yeah. And then pretty much it was quickly up. They got me up off the bed, into the shower. I lost an enormous amount of blood to the point where they had to put me in a wheelchair to put me in the ward, wheeled me in, said goodnight, Irene, and I probably wasn't really seen again. Like, obviously the staff in the midwifery practice one came back the next day, but otherwise I didn't see them. The maternity ward, obviously you're seeing regularly, but they're checking on the baby more so and whatnot. And
And
then
you, yeah.
not so much me, Sandy. We were sent
Mm,
home at 8 o'clock the very next night. They gave
wow.
baby Panadol because of the contusion on her head, and it was boggy. They were worried about her having scalp and brain damage. Still sent us home, and not as much as having my blood pressure checked. They wheeled me out into the car in a wheelchair,
Oh my God.
and that was it.
Did they check your wound? Did
No,
they? Oh wow, good God. Okay, so and I'm asking all these questions because I've read the book, but a lot of people will not have read the book, right? So,
yeah.
but I'm still hearing you actually say it out loud. Still actually blows my mind. So you get home with this new baby. How long was it really until you realized that you had physical trauma that had happened through the birth?
So because we were part of the midwifery practice, we did have our midwife one of the team visit every day for 10 days it was meant to be, and I think they ended up coming for 7. Those appointments were extremely rushed. I don't mind saying and being honest about that now, but I felt like systemically they were overworked. No fault of their own, but there was just too much. And you got to think about it too, it's October. So many babies are born in October because of the festive fun season. Everyone gets funky at Christmas, New Year, and then there's so many birthdays in October. So I do know now that they were overworked, but I do think it led to what happened next for me. So I was very, very sore and I was very raw, still trying to care. But at the same time, I was just in awe of this baby that it was just pushed aside because they kept saying it's normal part of normal birth, right? But then it got to the point where I could smell something in the pad. You know, you wear those maternity pads. I'm like, something doesn't smell right. And I could see yellow and I was like, I think I've got an infection maybe. And I asked them to check and they said, oh, no, it's okay. It's pretty normal. Just one of them said have a salt bath. And then the other one said do not have a salt bath.
Oh, wow.
So I did. I had one. But then I went to the toilet and I'm 40 plus. I come from a generation where my vagina and vulva I never looked at them. Ever. And so I thought something is not quite right. I certainly wasn't going to ask my husband to look. So I just got my camera out and just tried to see. And I took a photo and then I looked up. I'm like, holy shit, what is that? What is that? Because in my mind, this is a new parent sleep deprivation, mind you, I thought I could see another baby's head crowning from the opening of my vagina. It was like this pink, round, baby head looking thing. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having twins and they forgot. There's another one in there.
They missed one.
How could they do that? I mean, that's just ridiculous now, but I honestly thought that. So
but it's the panic, right? And so what you were actually looking at was a prolapse.
It was,
right?
a significant pelvic organ prolapse where my bladder had descended and pushed on the vaginal wall. So that was the vaginal wall I was seeing. I think sometimes I've said that was my bladder, but I've since learned my anatomy that it wasn't my actual bladder. It's the vaginal wall
collapsing basically, and your bladder sort of pushing down on that. For people who don't know, I think that's really important. And yours was extremely significant. So some women have, and I suppose they put it in stages, I guess, mild to extreme. Yours was extreme.
From 1 to 4. So they do like a staging from 1 to 4, and it can be different organs. It can be your bladder and your rectum. It can be like all the technical names. It can be your uterus. It can be even sometimes your intestines or urethra. There's so many different grades and types of prolapse, and I think even some of us women, Sandy, get confused. So if someone says, "Oh, I've got my PT said I've got a prolapse," why can't you still walk, Stephanie? Because they've probably got a stage 1, and I had a stage 3 with the extra layer of complexity of what they call bilateral avulsions. So the muscles that support all of the pelvic organs were literally torn off the bone with forceps.
Wow.
So that means that no amount of Kegels or physio to build that pelvic floor strength up is ever going to keep them up because they're not attached to the bone. Right? And I'm doing it with my hands, but I know no one can see.
And for those that can't see, what I might do in the show notes, obviously I'm going to put all the links up to where they can follow you. But what I might actually do too is we'll find some sites and put up some links so people who are listening but not necessarily watching your hands there with the muscles can actually get some more information, because it's quite traumatic what happened. So you've seen this, and I imagine you would have gone into shock thinking, what, A, am I having another baby? B, if not, what the hell is happening to my body?
Yeah, and C, next to that big pink bulge, all of my stitching was coming undone. I could actually see in between in my body, and that in itself was scared, because you think about it, you can't actually wipe yourself when you are torn open raw and the stitches, and all you can see is flesh. So to go to do a poo, I had to have a shower every time, and then it was wet, and then they're like, don't blow dry it with a hairdryer. But I'm like, how do you dry it? Like, you can't dry it. So we did get back on the phone to the midwife team and say, look, something's gone wrong. We need help. And the response was, you're fine. It's fine. It's normal. If it's really that bad, go to the doctor. And I was like,
Wow.
okay.
Thanks for your compassion. Thanks.
Actually, she said to my husband through the door, I was in the bathroom, she said, she's fine. And I could hear her, and I yelled so loud, I'm not effing fine. Like, stop telling me I'm fine, because it was messing with my mental health.
Of course, but also to the condescension of that, of hearing her say to your husband, "Oh, look, she's fine," and this happens a lot as we all know as women in any medical field, we are often not taken seriously. So we know something's going on with our bodies, but often we are not taken seriously. And as you say, when you have very overworked, time poor midwives coming in who don't have the time to kind of deal with your one-on-one situation, it really was like a perfect storm, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah. And in actual fact, though, I have seen one of them since who still believes their line that it's normal.
Wow. Okay.
So if this is normal childbirth, Sandy, then I don't know anyone who would put their hand up for it now. Right?
No. And I think this is unfortunately part of the problem, because we're not talking about prolapse, because we're not openly everywhere talking about what can happen, what are the risks of a natural childbirth. A lot of women are living with this trauma and not talking about it, not seeking medical help because they're being told it's normal, it's normal. So you, I imagine, so you go and seek medical help.
I do. I just, I can't be like this. And I remember my GP, he wouldn't look at me at first because he didn't have a nurse in the clinic because it was quite late. It was like 6 o'clock at night or something. He said, but come and see me first thing in the morning. And I said, okay. So when they did, and obviously he's been my GP for years, he looked at me, and I just remember the look on his face. It was like going from, oh, Elsie's so cute, to, oh, honey, what did they do to you?
What have they done?
Yeah. What has happened? Like, he's like, this is a mess. And so then it started sinking in what my mum and sister and auntie were all trying to tell me. This doesn't sound normal. And I was trying to convince them that it was normal because my midwife had told me that it's normal. When he had said that to me, I was like, oh, okay. What does this mean? What's going on? He had to send me to the hospital. He couldn't do anything.
Of course. And no GP is equipped necessarily to deal with. We're talking infection, a massive prolapse. We're talking stitches coming apart. We're talking all the traumatic things happening to you. Plus, I imagine you were in an enormous amount of pain and discomfort.
Yes, I couldn't sit. I actually literally could not sit on my bottom at all. I was trying donut cushions and rolled up towels and half sitting like this, all still by trying to breastfeed, and then trying to lay down on my side to try and breastfeed or whatever. I couldn't get comfortable in my own skin. I couldn't do anything. I felt like really shitty, actually.
Yeah, I bet you did. Wow. So you go to the hospital.
So we met with an obstetrician there who I had met once during my pregnancy. Because of the diabetes diagnosis, the midwifery practice have to refer you to an obstetric appointment. And I've since later found out, frustratingly, that in my notes, when he saw me, he said, Stephanie must see an obstetrician a minimum of 4 more times during this pregnancy.
Wow.
Those notes were ignored by whoever, I'm not pointing fingers, but whoever was charged to care for me in that hospital ignored that advice.
Wow.
That was scripted. I've seen it in my notes. She must see blah, 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 blah. I think because it had mental health reasons and obviously talking about fear and also the diabetes. So I'd met him once before, and then I went back and he was still there, and I told him what had happened, and he saw it and he said, okay, we've got some options now. We can go and put you under anesthetic. We can pull it all apart and we can start again. Or I can try you on these mega doses of antibiotics, see how you go. Let's give it 2 or 3 days. No salt baths, no hair dryers. He was really, and I felt like I could trust what he was saying for 3 days at least. I'm like, I'll give it 3 days. And I think it took about 5 days for it to stop weeping. And it did eventually get better. I think it took a month for it to close.
Right.
So for that entire time, I was living with an open wound. And there was a point there, even my best friend's husband said to me, you would have been better with cesarean scar, because at least you're not pooing out of your stomach. It's a really hygienic
exactly
place
right.
to heal, rather than having to try and go to the toilet and hose yourself off every time. So eventually, like I even stopped eating a lot because I didn't want to poo a lot because it would hurt.
You poor thing. Oh,
It was a state. I tell you, it was a state. So after seeing him, and then I only wanted to see him, I went back. I was meant to go back a week later. When I arrived, they said, that doctor in particular has resigned in protest because of this hospital. I was like, shit, am I the only one this isn't happening to? That's not right. That's not right. I thought maybe I was just unlucky. But if he has resigned because of what is happening in this hospital where I birthed my baby, something has to be done. You can't have that.
wow. Okay. So thankfully you were getting medical help.
Yes.
But the trauma didn't just end with, taking some antibiotics, obviously. Like it's a long journey for a prolapse. And so long term, obviously you're still living with,
I am.
you're living with that trauma. So what is the long-term outcome, and is it possible for prolapses to be, if you like, fixed? I mean, for want of a better word.
Yeah, sure. It's a very common word that a lot of women say, I just want to fix my prolapse. And that was me too. I just wanted it to be fixed so bad, so quickly, because before this, I was an athlete. And I had bought a jogger pram, and I was going to jog down the beach with my girl, and I was going to just walk the day away. And that's what my maternity leave was going to be. I couldn't even walk to my letterbox without being in pain. And so I said, right, I'm now on this mission. I'm going to go get it fixed. And they were the exact words I said. So I made an appointment with a women's health physio about 4 weeks in, I think, after birth. And then I found out it's too soon. She can't do an internal to your 6-week checkup. It's all still too raw. But I said to her, you have to see me anyway. I just want you to look at it. I just want you to tell me how to fix it. So I did. I went to the appointment and she did look externally. She's like, oh, that's quite a significant prolapse there. It looks like a cystocele, which is your bladder. There could be more to it, but you have to come back after 6 weeks. I worked with her for the next year and a half, doing a whole lot of pelvic floor physiotherapy, even including inserting like insertion stimulation to stimulate the muscles. After a good 7 months, she's like, obviously did retesting throughout, and at the end she said, you've worked really hard, but you've maybe even gone backwards. Like
there's more stuff going on here than meets the eye.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to have to refer you to a surgeon. So I have seen 3 surgeons. One who was a laparoscopic surgeon said, nope, I will not go near you because it will relapse, which means your prolapse will come back because of the avulsions. We can't attach that muscle back to the bone.
Right.
It doesn't work. It'll just come apart, and then your prolapses will be worse, potentially with some extra complications. I saw another pelvic floor physio, and they were like, no, you could maybe have surgery once you're finished, like when you're really old. In the meantime, here's a pessary, let's plug it up. Mind you, I think I've tried 7 pessaries over the years, and none of them have worked because of the avulsions as well. And then I saw the last surgeon, who was promising. He was the only one that did an hour and a half worth of testing, really methodical, like I'm on my wavelength, like not just shoving his hand up there and guessing what stage. He actually did a whole lot of scanning, 4D, 3D scanning type thing, and then gave me a proper diagnosis and said, you could be a potential candidate for surgery, but you have to be 100% finished with having kids.
Yeah, fair enough too. Yeah. Because the pressure of having another baby
The
in
pregnancy
your womb
even.
and pushing down on everything, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. So I said, okay. And this was in October. So Elsie was just turning 1. And I said, all right, I'd never even wanted another baby. Like, we were one and done. That was enough. One traumatic birth is enough in one person's lifetime. However, we never considered Elsie. And when I went to pick her up that afternoon, she was playing at my mum's house, and I looked at her and I'm like, she might want a sibling. So I said to my husband, so basically we gave ourselves 3 months. We said by the end of this year, if it's not done, then we're going to move on, book in for that surgery and be totally fulfilled. We had all the love in the world we needed from her. It was enough. And then I was pregnant next month. So you go from 5 years to 1 month, you know.
And one of the things I want to ask you about is, and not to be too personal, but I think that while we're on this conversation, having a prolapse, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, and obviously it's different for everyone, but it also impacts your sex life and your sense of self as a woman, your femininity, you know, our ownership of our vagina, if you like.
Totally.
Right? And our inner goddess, all the things. It makes us feel, I imagine, you know, for anyone who's going through it, I imagine that it really impacts all of that, which means it impacts on your relationship with your partner.
Yes.
Right?
And I think that it's so fun to ask that because it's the number 2 question asked the most. Number 1 is, how do you have another baby with prolapse? But number 2 is like, how do you even fall pregnant? How do you have sex?
Yeah. How do you have sex?
And
Yeah.
probably more people.
Carefully.
Yeah. probably more people want to ask, but they've got that, oh, well, you know, I don't want to go too far. I'm okay to answer it because I think it's valuable to know that it's never been the same. So I will say that without being, you know, stepping on the privacy of my husband. I respect he's so supportive of me saying whatever I want about myself. That's fine. But to respect his privacy, it's never been the same. A lot of, funny enough, in the beginning, a lot of people would say, just have sex and then the penis pushes the prolapse back up into place. Okay, haha, that's amazing, but it doesn't quite work that way.
No. And so thankfully, I just wanted to touch on that, and I didn't want, as you said, certainly did not want to invade your privacy or your husband's privacy because it's a big deal. But I just wanted our listeners to be aware, because they're probably thinking it, that it absolutely impacts women who go through prolapse.
Yeah, and I think luckily enough, for now, having toddlers like 2 under 2. The sheer tiredness of being parents of 2 under 2, it kind of lets you sail under the radar for a while. Because you're really tired and you've got no energy. No one's got energy. But now they're 4 and 6, things are changing. And I know that level of intimacy will need to be addressed better than it has been. And for those who really want to know, for me to be able to do it, I got really drunk at my daughter's first birthday. And so just being able to relax, and that's taking the pressure off, because sometimes it hurts, but then we don't continue. It's uncomfortable. Doesn't feel the same for either of us. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that has been taken away in that birthing suite, for sure.
So in terms of surgery for you, and so let's go down that path and where things are at right now.
Yeah, so I went and had the second baby, and it was amazing. And I do want to say, I went and found that obstetrician who helped me, and I tracked him down, and he did open a private practice. And I said, I need you to help me birth this baby, because I have to have a cesarean this time. Like, I couldn't return to the place where the trauma happened. And he was the person that convinced me, well, educated me. He didn't convince me, it was my decision, that I actually didn't need a cesarean, that having a cesarean could potentially have some impact on further surgery.
Right.
So if I was going to have the prolapse surgery and having a cesarean, there may be scar tissue. So he educated me on that, because the surgery was always at the light. Let's just say it was always the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I did have a second vaginal birth. with a lot of hand holding. He held that space for me.
And pain relief, I hope.
No, I
Oh,
didn't.
good Lord, woman.
I had gas. Yes, no, that is
Thank
pain.
you.
That is pain. That is pain relief. It's just that he came quicker than expected.
Yeah,
That's why. It wasn't that I was trying to be brave and tough and get a medal. He just came too quick for it.
Well,
For
I'm
any.
glad you at least had some gas.
And he was little. He was so tiny. It was that healing birth experience that I think a lot of women with birth trauma hopefully can be blessed with, right?
Yep.
If that's their choice to have a second birth. So then I went back pretty much. I had Louis in the July, and I was back in January to the surgeon going, right, I'm here, let's do it.
Let's do this thing, yeah.
Let me get back to some type of Steph where I can take my kids for a walk, where I can play in the park with them, where I can cook their dinner without being in pain. Just really simple shit that I thought.
Where you can sit down properly.
So he said, okay, so we went and did this process. It's called urodynamics testing, where they do a whole lot of tests pre-surgery. And at the end of that appointment, I think that went for about 2 hours again. And he says to me, Steph, I'm really sorry to tell you, you're not a candidate for this surgery. If I do this for you, you've got a 90% failure rate within 2 years. And I was like, I'm not sure if I'm up for that. Like, those stats are not in my favour at all. And it also would have meant partial hysterectomy and then going through menopause at 40. Sorry, how old was I? 30, 38 or something. I was like, can I come back to you when you've got better stats? And he said, well, yeah, you have to. Like, I'm pretty sure, he said you could go and look for someone else. But I knew at that point that he was the leading person that other people look up to, because I went to go and see someone else for, she was an obstetrician gynecologist, and she said, look, I can't help you, but you need to go see this guy. I'm like, I already see that guy. She's like, oh, geez. There's not much more you can do here.
Wow, okay, yeah.
There's really not much more you can do here in Australia. Your next thing will be overseas, if you were game enough to do any type of guinea pig stuff over there. So here we are, my daughter's 6, and quite funnily, after writing the book and starting the community, people have this conception that I was able to fix my prolapse. Like, well, you're healed, you're fixed. I'm like, no, I still live with it every day.
You live with it every day. And the really fascinating thing, if people read the book, they will know that it's an ongoing journey for you to live with this trauma until someone can come up with something, as you say, with better stats, until there are new surgical procedures that over time develop for women who are going through your particular type of trauma. Because as you say, it's not easy to attach tissue and muscle back to bone. It just doesn't, that's not an easy thing to do.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you mind if I just jump in there as well? Because a lot of people will say, women have had this type of surgery with mesh. So they used to use mesh, and that was acting as the attachment to the bone. However, that's been banned since 2015.
It's fascinating that you bring that up, because we had an amazing guest on this podcast named Erin Guest, and Erin actually is a survivor of not of the mesh, but she was a survivor of a medical device called the eSure, which at the same time as the mesh was banned, and both of those products are part of an extraordinary Netflix documentary series. I don't know if anyone's seen doco movie. I'll put the link down below so people can read that as well. It's quite fascinating. Okay. You're right. So mesh has been banned. It has caused lifelong trauma for the women that have undergone that mesh surgery, because essentially it cannot be removed once it's put in, and your tissue grows over it, and it's caused massive pain, trauma.
Chronic, like trauma on top of trauma. And look, I do know of some women who have had mesh many years ago, and it's been really successful, and that's amazing for them. But then for the others where it's been really damaging, it's really hard.
And it's huge. There are support groups all around the world, as we learnt through the beautiful bravery and courage of Erin, who came on and shared her story about that.
Yeah.
And yes, there are. So, I mean, people can just look it up, really. And as I said, I'll put some links. I'll write myself a note to do that in the show notes because people might be thinking, oh, but someone, I've heard of that.
Yeah, that's right.
And thank you for jumping in and expressing that. I think when something has been, that damaging, it then does not become an option. And as you say, thankfully, it took a long time for it to be banned everywhere in the world. Including Australia. So, and for any women out there listening who have had that done and are suffering, we see you and acknowledge you because it's a lifelong journey to basically live with pain and suffering.
When all they were trying to do was fix their prolapse.
Correct. It's and that in and of itself that's a whole other podcast because it's so traumatizing, for so many women.
Yeah.
I'm glad you raised that though, because it's really important. So when people say, why don't you just go and get it fixed? For some women, there is no easy fix, just like yourself. And you've gone down every path and you've basically exhausted everything in Australia, at least.
I'm pretty sure I have. I don't feel like I've left any stone unturned, but if anyone's listening and they think, well, this might be possible, just message me. I'm open ears and open heart to anything. Nothing's too...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reach out. But this leads me to your next project. So first of all, before I just jump out of the book, because it's so extraordinary, and I love that you went to Bali to go to a writing retreat with Andy Griffith, and that you end up coming back and going, oh, wow, I've written this book, which is cathartic, but also that you needed and you knew you needed to put out into the world. So thank you for doing that. So many women will be grateful. So in launching the book, what I wanted to know was what was the response from family, this is important, from family, from your close friends, and also for the community that you have built out there under your Brave Mama banner.
Yeah, I think initially my family were shocked and heartbroken, because they didn't understand what was happening for us. They knew that something was off, for years, but just didn't really know. So, here's a perfect example. As a trauma response, which I didn't recognize at the beginning, when Elsie was born, I was hypervigilant and I didn't want anyone touching her at all. Not my husband. And what is it when you have a baby? Everyone wants a cuddle. And my mum went to feed her one day and she had the bottle and she kind of put her hand on the cheek. And I was like, don't touch her. Don't touch her face. And at the time, I thought it was really logical to say that to Mum, like, don't make her germy. But now in retrospect, you realise, that would have scared the shit out of my mum to say, why can't she touch her face? But so they learnt a lot. And then it was a question of, well, why didn't you tell us? And I said, well, because I didn't have the words to say something that I did not understand myself. And only through writing did I write it. And I used to do this thing. I don't know if all writers do this, but I did this because I wrote every morning at 4 a.m. for 1 hour, consistently every day. But just to make sure I was on track, I would listen to the paragraph I wrote before on the Word document. You can do a voice thing.
Yes.
And it reads it back to you in a very robotic voice. But I remember listening the first time before I submitted it to the publisher. And I listened to the entire thing. And then I sat back in my chair and I was like, oh, that poor girl. Holy moly, that's horrible. And then I went, oh shit, that's me actually. That is me. And that was like a major light bulb moment to go, I haven't said any of this to anyone. And I had an amazing group of 5 mums in our mothers group, and they came to the launch, and they've always been a beautiful bunch of friends, but they were like, we're so sorry we couldn't support you better. I'm like,
we didn't know.
I didn't know. Didn't know. I just thought I had to pretend to be mum and happy, and because they saw me for maybe an hour a week, but to get myself to that hour, the preparation involved and parking the car and doing all that really heavy thinking about what am I going to wear so the prolapse isn't worse, and how can I park myself on the ground so that I don't have to get up and walk around, all of that stuff. And they were just sad. They were sad that that they couldn't help. And then I felt really guilty. I was like, oh God, No, what have I done?
As if you hadn't been through enough, now you feel guilty. No, but I mean, I hope that you've been able to let go of some of that guilt by sharing this and putting this out into the world, because in doing so, what you are doing is not only helping your friends and family to understand what you survived and lived through, and your husband as well,
Yeah.
but you're helping other women and building a community for women who are living through birth trauma, and an extraordinary thing that you've achieved.
Well, thank you for saying that. That's really kind. A couple of things there is that a really nice thing when I got back from Bali and this had all kind of happened, my husband one day said to me, he said, "You took that girl to Bali and you brought my wife back."
Oh, that's so emotional. I can see that still makes you emotional
It
too.
is because
That's a beautiful, beautiful thing for him to say,
because I couldn't tell him why I had to go to Bali, but he told me in that one line. It's like, yeah, I knew I had to go. I couldn't explain it, but yeah, sorry, God, I am emotional.
Hey, it happens a lot here in the confessional.
But I also think that I put this book out thinking that I could change the world, Sandy, for people who haven't had a baby yet. And then I soon realised that the book is probably targeted more for women who are like me, who have been through birth trauma, to feel seen and heard. But then I also think it's written for the people charged caring for us, our midwives, our obstetricians, our GPs. Everyone in the medical field should read it. But then I also think, and I think I've been helped along the way by talking about to other women, that we need to really be talking about this before women are pregnant. Because if I honestly have to reflect, if my pregnant self, if someone gave me that book, I probably would tell them where to shove it. Because I'm not having trauma because I was so hell-bent that my birth was going to be perfect and beautiful. So I think that maybe beforehand,
Absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. And I think, it's really interesting. I think if the more we talk about this stuff in society, the more normalized it would become. And then the more women would understand this prior to even, going out into their birth journey.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think for people like myself, and I think my birth trauma was completely different. I did not have a prolapse. But in reading your book, really, as I said, I wish that I had something like, I wish I'd read your story when I had given birth to my child. So in my case, I was 21. I was fearless. I was a very young mum, almost 22. And when my water broke, the first thing that I did was go and put on makeup. And because I was going to go to the hospital and it was going to be fabulous and I was going to give birth to this baby, and it was, the choir would sing and the angels would come down from heaven, and it was just going to be easy and brilliant. And when I walked into the hospital, I remember the midwives, like, all sort of having a look. They looked at each other and kind of one of them chuckled. Like, I think they thought, bless, here she is with her makeup on and she's got no idea what's coming. And of course, I didn't really have any idea what was coming. It was a 12-hour labour. My contractions were very close together and I was fairly dilated very early on. My baby's head crowned, and it was another 6 hours with that baby's head crowning, and they could not get him out. And at which point, and at some point during this, I had an obstetrician and she had come in. But I think she thought, this will just be an easy one. And so there were midwives there and they were brilliant. And in fact, I credit those midwives to saving my life. They knew pretty early on that something was wrong. And there was huge fights over the top of me, by the way, between the midwives, two midwives and this obstetrician who was a woman. And I kept saying, I'm in so much pain, I'm in so much pain. And she said, oh, don't be ridiculous. You're not the only woman, you're not the first woman who's had a baby.
I hate that.
Right. So now my child is now 30. I am to this day extraordinarily grateful that he's here. But what happened during the course of that was the obstetrician at some point thought this is not working and decided to push him back up into the birth canal. I have since spoken to many women where this has happened as well. But for a long time, I thought I was the only person in the world. Unfortunately, what happened was I went into what they call obstetric shock. My heart stopped. I flatlined. And I was gone.
Sandy.
So at that point, though, the gynecologist, a pediatrician was called. One of the midwives called a pediatrician before my heart stopped. She overrode the guy. So that's where the fighting was coming from. He walked in. He's like listening to he's saying, we're losing. I heard him actually say, we're losing this baby. And I remember my partner, my mother were in the room. They got ushered out. So they knew all hell was about to break loose.
Yeah.
And there was this beautiful anaesthetist who was called in by the pediatrician, called him down. And he came in and I remember I was laying down. He was standing at my head and he was stroking my hair. And he was South American, and he was saying to me with this beautiful accent, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right.
Oh.
And I don't remember this, but he came to see me after everything had happened, that he said, I looked back at him and said, I'll die, but just get my baby out, let my baby live. And he was South American and incredibly religious. And he said for him, it was it was like a religious moment, a spiritual moment of, that I would give up my life for my son. And so I was not religious at all, so it didn't come from that place. And then through all of this, yes, so my heart stopped. Thank God. That anaesthetist literally dove over. He was actually doing CPR, and they knew they had to get the baby out.
Yep.
Because they couldn't do anything for me until they did. So I have a Caesar scar. This is why I don't tell this story to, expectant mothers. I have a Caesar scar that goes from hip to hip.
Yep.
No anesthetic, nothing. There was no time. My heart had stopped. So they just sliced and diced. They got that baby out, literally, and then they zapped me back and brought me back. But my baby's heartbeat was dropping dramatically, and they thought, he was in trauma. I was gone. They brought me back as well. And to this day, sometimes even when this is a really funny story, but even when I have a really hot shower, I still get these purple marks. I can just see the outline.
The pads.
From the paddles, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And that lasted, they used to be really purple every time I had a shower for many years. I mean, they're very faint now. But they brought this baby back. And I remember after all of the trauma, of coming back, and obviously I was in ICU and it was all a bit fuzzy, but the first time I sort of remember coming to, everything was white. I'm in this room, curtain, whatever. I don't know. And I'm drugged up. I honestly thought I had gone to heaven.
Oh, of course, because that's what they do in the movies. They let you go and then then everything's white.
I am. And clearly it was the drugs. Apparently adrenaline will do this to you too, because they pump you full of adrenaline. And hilariously, I was like, because I'm so not religious, I was like, wow, it exists. There's a heaven.
I'm here.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then a nurse came in who I don't know who I thought she was in heaven, but I said, oh, my baby, can I just see my baby once? And she said, oh, yeah, I'll bring him. I unwrapped this baby. He was fat and he had wings and he was beautiful. And then I was saying to the nurse, but he had this huge mark on his head, and they'd use forceps trying to get him out early on.
Yeah.
And he had a massive kind of bruise right up his head. And I said to her, oh, look at him. He's an angel.
Like
he's got
cherub.
wings. Look at him. He's got wings. And she was looking at me, bless her. And I remember she took the baby off me and she said, darling, can you hear yourself? And I said, yes, he's beautiful. And she said, can you hear yourself? I just want you to think for a minute. And then it kind of slowly sinks in that you're going, oh my God. And I was like, oh, and then I think I blacked out again. The next time I saw my baby and I was really with it was this skinny, screaming, normal baby with no wings. And I said to her, this is not my baby because my baby's got wings.
Oh, Sandy.
Bless. Anyway, incredible.
Lord.
But I think years later, and being so young, trying to fathom that, and I don't think I carried that birth trauma around with me. I didn't realise, that I did carry that birth trauma until, as I say, I was pregnant many years later. By this stage, I'm divorced, remarried, and, and I'm pregnant with my new husband at that time, and thinking the whole way through, oh God, I'm going to face that again. This is going to happen.
Of course.
Strangely, I did go to my new gynecologist obstetrician and I said to her, do you think I could do a trial labour? And she looked at me and said, there is not a hope in hell. And, I'm happy to refer you to as many obstetricians as you want, but no one's going to touch you with a barge pole. It's a Caesar. It's never going to happen.
Okay.
And I would, of course, arm myself with knowledge and education. And I trusted her incredibly, this new obstetrician. And she was right. There was no way. But there you go. But in reading your book, I think there's so many different kinds of trauma. Yours is such an extraordinary story, but it allows other women the space to talk about their trauma. And I have spoken about mine before, and I'm actually fine now at 52.
I can still see it in you though, Sandy. I don't think it ever leaves you, does it?
I don't think it could ever go away. And I actually think, you carry that fear. I certainly did through the next 2 pregnancies. And I'm just so grateful they are all here. My son likes to joke to his siblings that he is like a Jesus baby.
He is a bit.
But I do think, it's something that will never go away. You learn to understand it, and you educate yourself medically, all the things of what happened, how could that possibly happen? But you're right, I don't think it ever goes away. And so in you writing this beautiful book, if you've given women a voice and a space to feel safe.
I hope so, because do you know what I do wish? And did I just jump in too soon there?
No,
I do wish that I had the knowledge and power to advocate for myself, because that's what we have to do, to say, okay, we're here at this position now. We've been here for 18 hours. I think I'd like a cesarean, please. So there's 2 things we have to do. We have to unpeel the layer of shame that natural birth advocacy can carry, that cesarean is, when you read things like on Instagram and they say, oh, shocking, alarming, cesarean rates are going up to 36%. And I say, who gives a shit? The people that give a shit are the people who are paying for them. And let's be honest, this government policy that was brought out called Towards Normal Birth pushed my hospital to make me push that baby out because it was cheaper than having a cesarean. The next layer of that is that natural birth advocates honestly do believe that vaginal birth is better. They will give you all the stats and reasons why a cesarean is not good for a baby, and they could end up with asthma and eczema and blah de blah de blah. And when you're thrown these stats in your face, you think that you're making a choice that natural birth is better, because that's what you're being sold. I wish we could eliminate all of that and look at each woman as an individual rather than a statistic. Because every time you stat me, you take the human element out of my story. Every time you tell me that my birth trauma is not as common or whatever, you're forgetting Stephanie the person. And that needs to change. I thought the book would do all of that magically. Like, ta-da! I fixed childbirth. And you're like, oh God, it's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean. Because we've got centuries of beliefs, feelings, core structural thought processes that one little me cannot change alone.
And no, but what you have done is created, as I said, you're starting to create this community through the Brave Mama site, which is brilliant. And the book, I think, will help women who have lived through birth trauma not feel so alone.
I hope.
I do believe that you're doing that, Stephanie. So,
Thank you.
And I think you're right. It's a systematic thing. I'm really sad that having a child 30 years ago, despite the fact that my heart stopped, having a Caesar was looked upon. And I remember going to this mothers group where they were all older than me and they all had natural births. And the way that one particular woman who clicked her tongue at me, and I never went back. So I missed out on the support of a mothers group. Because I felt really, I felt they were really condescending in that.
She judged
I felt
you.
so judged, and I felt like I was young and stupid, as if I had any control over the birth of that child. And for the other 2, I started really, I think, speaking out with the other 2 when I had to have a Caesar, and I would read in these like mothers groups and mothers forums and whatever, so many bitchy comments about women who took the easy way out and had a Caesar, and
Rubbish.
it was first of all, it's a grieving thing for any woman who thinks they're going to have a natural birth, as I did, as a lot of women do, who don't have that opportunity. But also for some women, and my obstetrician, and this is a really important point, my brilliant obstetrician, she said to me 100 years ago, 50 years ago from when I had my birth, she says 50 years ago, you would have been one of those women who just died in childbirth. Done. You and your baby wouldn't even be here. She said, thank God for medical, technology. Thank God that we now know different things. There is no reason, as she said to me even back then, there is no reason for any woman to have to go through natural childbirth without any pain relief. She said, that's ridiculous to even think that. She said, and for a lot of women, natural childbirth is not actually an option, or it shouldn't be an option. And as she said to me, the biggest outcome, and this is my gynecologist who I had for my two later babies.
Yep.
And she just said to me at the end of the day, what is the most important thing here? It isn't, it is actually having a healthy baby.
Yeah.
Delivered.
And a healthy mum. Let's say that.
And a healthy
mum
mother.
together.
Right?
If that's what people want us to journey into motherhood, then let's make it as safe and as possible and as happy for everyone involved, whatever that pathway looks like. I just think the pitting of the vaginal versus cesarean, it's going to be ongoing unless, like you said, we start talking about it openly. And that starts from a really young age when we talk about with our young girls, even about their pelvic floor. And we don't have to talk about anything sexual in high school or birth or, and we're not going to prepare
we
them.
should be. By the time high school happening, I really think we should be talking about that stuff. It should not be this, 16, 17-year-old girls, 15-year-old girls are highly capable, I think, of hearing this information and seeing it as, okay, this is a natural thing if I choose to have a child.
Yes.
I need to understand my body, and I need to understand. That's the other thing. We're not really understanding our own bodies, and we're being taught that getting pregnant, having a baby is the most natural thing in the world.
It's like the rite of passage. But I do also think that when I initially started, yes, I was working in this birth trauma space. There are organisations and other individuals who are doing that and have done it for longer than me, which is why I probably wanted to move into something more like the pelvic organ prolapse, because I feel like I can have a bigger impact there. When I think about my daughter, I can't ever really control her birth. No matter how much preparation I do for her and talk to her and educate her and talk to her, what happens in her birth will happen. But I can teach her more about her pelvic floor and pelvic organ prolapse as a child. No straining when you poo, not eating too much junk food, drinking lots of water so your poos come out in the lead up to if she chooses to ever fall pregnant. So that I felt like I moved a little bit away from the trauma itself, because it's hard to stay in that trauma space as well, I will say, to the things that I can have a bigger impact on, which is why I know you probably want to talk a little bit about the podcast, which is why I continued, because to change the spectrum of not just childbirth, but a woman with a pelvic floor, because now we've got 1 in 2 women with pelvic floor dysfunction, which is way more than birth trauma. I think we've got a better chance at helping women at a very early age, and then potentially once they are ready to birth, they already are a little bit more ahead of the game.
Yes, absolutely. I 100,000% agree with that. But also too that I do think that there should be a space when we're learning about getting pregnant, when we're learning about birth, when we're learning about all of those things, that we should actually have like a little caveat that for, some women, these are the risks that can happen. Right, for all women, there's a risk. There is absolutely a risk. But if we're armed with knowledge is power. And it might actually change the way some women view their birthing experience, to take pressure off some women who are being told, this does not look like it's not looking like you're going to have a vaginal birth, and for them to go, okay, then I'm all right with that. I do know things are changing. I have got friends who, from the onset, as soon as they were pregnant, said, I'm just going to, I'm going to go with the flow. I hope to have a vaginal birth, but if I don't, so be it. I just want this baby. That's it. I think that's a beautiful way to actually view pregnancy and to not put this extraordinary pressure on ourselves as women, that we are somehow achieving greatness if we have a vaginal birth or failing if we have a Caesar.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous,
definitely.
but it is part of a patriarchal and societal thing of pitting women against each other, regardless of what it may be. And now even birthing isn't a safe space for us. As I said, 30 years ago, I was very judged for, and my other children are, one's about to turn 24 and my baby's 21. There was still like quite a bit of that bullshit going on, that if you've
Yeah.
had a Caesar, you somehow opted out.
I'm so sorry
I'm
that
sad to
happened to
hear that
you.
21 years later, people are still doing that shit. I mean, we need to cut that nonsense out, and as women really support each other, especially in these extraordinary spaces like childbirth, like pregnancy, where we should be supporting one another and
And
helping each other.
we could do a whole nother show on this, but
Oh, we could.
even when you get to breastfeeding, and like I will sadly admit now that my ignorance, I guess, when I went to Mother's Group, and one was bottle feeding, the rest were breastfeeding. I passed judgment in my mind. I never said anything out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, why isn't she
Oh, yeah,
breastfeeding?
that's a whole other. We could do like
You
two
know?
podcasts on
Yeah.
breastfeeding and the judgment. Agreed.
But sometimes you don't realize you're doing it until you've done it. And then I was like, oh, hang on a minute. And then she told me why. And I was like, oh, God, I shouldn't have thought that. Why did I even think that? But it's
And who
ingrained.
cares?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and as women, what we need to do is empower women to have choices. If you choose to have a Caesar for whatever reason, and you are talking about that with your obstetrician or gynecologist, we never know what's going on with other people. And I think
Yeah.
yeah, we've got to stop the sort of judging. I know that it's so ingrained in society, but the more we can stop judging each other as women, the more support we can give each other, which leads me to your beautiful new project. So congratulations on your podcast, which launched in September. Is that right?
Women's Health Week, right smack bang in Women's Health Week. I don't think you could have
Woohoo.
picked a better week for it, I think.
I'm loving it. And so the name of your podcast is?
The Lowdown with Brave
I love it.
Mama. So we give the lowdown. We really just open up those conversations that you kind of, when you meet someone for the first time and it's like, hi, how are you? Yeah, good, how are you? And then after the 10th time, you really start to talk openly and honestly, and go, oh my God, I can't breastfeed either. I really friggin' hate it. I don't want to do it, but I feel those type of conversations where you just go to
The
that,
important conversations.
yeah, the next level, kind of when, I guess what we were just saying, the judgment falls away, that I feel like I can open up and say to you, I hated breastfeeding, without thinking that you were going to judge me. So we are having those conversations with women where they can be themselves, no judgment, and hopefully I think that's going to help so many women. Oh, I know it does, because they tell me, like, we get private messages all the time saying, I feel like I'm not the only one going through this now.
I love that. And as you say with your podcast, it's like, it's periods to pregnancy and then
Motherhood
it's
to menopause.
motherhood to menopause. Preach it, sister, because I think the more women like your good self who are out there openly discussing all of these things, the better it is for all of us. I wish, as I said, that these conversations had been happening 30 odd years ago when I was pregnant with my child, and podcasts were not even a thing then.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important, and that's what we aspire to do in this podcast, as just like as you do in yours, is to have open conversations about the issues that impact women. That we are not alone, and that there's always someone out there who possibly has gone through a similar experience. We know that even if you have what appears on paper to be an identical experience, it's never identical, that each of our journeys is so individual, but it does help to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, it really does, because not only have I put this out to try and create a community, but just as much, Sandy, they give me community. I feel seen and heard within my group, and I love that. It feels like I belong somewhere, really belong somewhere, by just being me. It's so good.
And that's one of the most powerful things that you can do. I think, I recently put up a quote, I think, on one of our sites from Michelle Obama, who talks about, the difference between a healthy society, and this is not what she said verbatim, by the way.
That's
Let
all
me
good.
paraphrase.
Yeah.
The difference between a healthy society and a broken society. A healthy society is one in where women feel seen, heard, and respected, because that's community. And I, that so resonates with everything that I do. I
Yes.
love what you were doing. There are so many amazing women. I know that birth trauma is getting talked about slowly by amazing people. I know that Clementine Ford has talked about birth trauma and how this has been overlooked by a lot of women. I think any woman who has a platform, can help to talk about women's issues and the many things that happen to us biologically that weirdly we're supposed to feel ashamed about and yet we cannot control.
Wouldn't it be amazing that the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing, and Clementine and everyone else who is doing something, and obviously we can't name them all because there's quite a few now.
There's so many, yes.
Wouldn't it be amazing that one day it put us out of a job because we did such a good job?
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect. I mean, I feel like for me, I'll be really lucky. I could do this until the day I die because there will always be women who do, who just have amazing stories. But you're right. In terms of equality for women, one of the places that we're still fighting for equality and to be heard is in the medical arena. For so many women, and in my, age demographic, it's menopause.
Yep, exactly.
For a lot of women, not being heard, not being believed, not being taken seriously with what they are going through. Menopause is a very different journey for every woman. And for women having to desperately Google and find information themselves about what is happening to their bodies is insane.
It is insane.
Right. So there's, you've got all that to look forward to. Yay.
It's here. It's knocking at my door. Don't you worry.
Knocking at your door,
it's Perry knocking at my door.
Well, I'm still perimenopausal. And here's another thing that women don't realise, and for younger listeners who are listening to this, that perimenopause is not something that you get and it lasts like a year and then you're suddenly in menopause. Perimenopause can actually last 15 years. And it's different for every woman. I know the textbooks will tell you it's like maybe 2 to 5 years.
That's what I thought.
For some women, it can last. And so my beautiful doctor has said to me, no, some women are perimenopausal for 15 odd years.
Awesome.
Yay. Woo. What she does say, though, is that no woman should need to suffer through menopause needlessly either. That's a whole other podcast.
Let's do it.
But I think the big thing for all women, and one of the things that I know that you are proactive about, is that never be afraid as a woman to go get a second opinion.
Third, fourth, fifth.
Third, fourth, whatever it may take.
Yep.
Never be afraid to keep reading about new things that are happening in science and in the medical realm. Yep. And if you're not being taken seriously by your GP, go find a new one.
Easy. Just like that. You just go, I love you, but you're not my jam.
See you later.
I'm moving on.
You're not understanding me. And, some GPs are brilliant for your everyday stuff, which is what they are trained to do.
Yep.
If you've got the flu, if you might have cut your arm, you might need some stitches. Brilliant, right? But some GPs are not well versed in female issues, in birthing issues, in whatever it may be. So go find yourself a new one who'll take you seriously and will send you on to see specialists if you need it.
And that's part of our next plan, Sandy, is that all of this stuff as a collective is that we build better health literacy, so that I want to target universities. So even in women's health fitness space, anyone who is involved in caring for a woman is better armed instead of a 1-hour lecture. There's a lot of work to do. I feel like I've got my life's work ahead of me too. And that's really exciting. I actually really love it.
It is exciting. We have spoken for so long now.
How good is it?
It's brilliant, and I could talk all day. If I had the time, we just kept talking. I am going to put all of your links below so people can follow you.
Perfect.
So where they can find your book, where they can find your website, where they can listen to your brilliant podcast.
Thank you.
It's really exciting, and I just love that you are in this space advocating for other women.
Thank you for your generosity today, your very kind words, and your time. Yes, I do see that we've been an hour and a half. And that's fine. I think,
it's such an important subject. I'm sure down the track we'll be having you on again, hearing about all the amazing other things that are yet to come, as you say. I do think that a million women out there will be grateful for better literacy
Yeah.
in our healthcare system.
Likewise, Sandy, I'm going to put you on the spot. I really want you on the show. I really want you to come and talk to us on the Lowdown with Brave Mama, because you too are a very brave mama.
Thank you. And I would absolutely be honoured to share the space on your podcast. I think it's really needed and brilliant. I know there's so many women out there finally finding a voice in different areas and speaking out. And for all of us, that can only be a good thing.
Love it. Love it. Come back for season 2 next year for sure.
Yay! Can't wait. It's just been brilliant talking to you. As I said, I will put up all the links for Stephanie's site and her book and her podcast. Please do follow her journey. And, you know, I hope this has been really helpful for any woman out there who has gone through birth trauma, who is surviving birth trauma and feeling, I hope, not so alone through this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Now, I won't get you